Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to give a quick summary of the Day 10 meta in the 3.16 Scourge League. So I want to go through the Ascendancies that are doing well and poorly, defensive archetypes as best I can define them that are doing well and doing poorly, and also looking at some of the popular primary skills. So firstly, a quick note on methodology. You can skip this if you've seen any of these similar videos before. GGG published the ladder, which is a list of the top 15,000 characters by XP acquired. This also contains the 15,000 characters who have delved the deepest. And there's a lot of overlap between these, so it's not 30,000 characters, it's more like 20,600 or so that appear on the ladder in total. And then combined, these give an overview of the most successful build archetypes. There'll be plenty of people that aren't on the ladder that are doing really well in the league. There's also plenty of people that will be on the ladder that, sort of goofing off a lot. But generally speaking, this is the most scientific way that we can get a sense of how the league is going overall. This data is scraped by the website POE.ninja, and they scrape it for the core league, but also for hardcore, for solo self-found, and for hardcore solo self-found, so for all the hard modes. Harder game modes do sharply constrain what successful builds look like, and you do want to keep in mind there will always be a percentage of players on the ladder, usually only a few dozen, that will actively mess around with their builds for a laugh. So, people who will be the first player to hit level 100 in the league might sometimes decide, you know what, I'm going to allocate Avatar of Fire and I'm going to take Atsuri's Promise and I'm going to do all sorts of other things that just don't work together like that in order to make their build look ridiculous. So let's start with Ascendancy Spread. So no Ascendancy truly towers over all of the others in this league. This is not a repeat of, say, 3.7, which was Legion League, where you had 49% of high-level players being Slayers. However, there is a pretty clear split where 5 of the Ascendancies are excellent, 4 are solid, and 10 are just really underperforming quite a bit. This is a bit worse than the situation was in 3.15, where it was more of a 7-4-8 split from memory. Now that is for trade-enabled softcore. When you look at hardcore, Champion and Inquisitor rise a lot at the expense of most others. When you look at solo self-found, Champion and Pathfinder rise at the expense of most others. And hardcore solo self-found combines both effects and Champion just goes to the moon. So as you might expect, harder game modes allow less versatility, but also there's a solo self-found factor where many builds are highly dependent upon specific uniques, and people generally don't try playing those builds unless they're either confident that they can get those uniques or they're very confident that they can make do without them for a long time. So you find, for instance, a lot of people that might otherwise have considered playing a Saboteur might not do so because they're not confident they can get their hands on a Cold Iron Point, and they feel like Cold Iron Point is just such a good weapon for their build that they're willing to play something else, and if they happen across a Cold Iron Point, then they'll re-roll a Saboteur. So for the hard numbers of about 20,500 characters on the ladder, you got 2837 of them playing Champion, 2709 playing Saboteur, 2,606 playing Occultists, 2,261 playing Necromancers, and 1946 of them playing Raiders. That is the A and S tier classes. Then you have what you might term the B tier classes. So that is Gladiator, Pathfinder, Inquisitor, and Berserker, each with more than 1,000, less than 1,500 players in the ladder. And then you have all of the ones that just sort of trail down a long way. Deadeye, Elementalist, Hierophant, Assassin, Slayer, Ascendant, Guardian, Chieftain, Juggernaut, and Trickster. And poor Trickster is really doing badly this league. And so this is a better spread than we had in any of the 2020 leagues, but worse than 3.15 or 3.14 had. Some of the unpopular Ascendancies will improve over time because they do tend to scale more with gear. Ascendant is a great example here. There's a unique duel called Unnatural Instinct that is very good on a lot of builds, but is just quite a bit better on the Ascendant than it is on other builds. And as a result, there's a lot of players who just haven't been able to get themselves an Unnatural Instinct yet. Those players might consider rolling an Ascendant when they do get an Unnatural Instinct and a bunch of other gear to go with it. And so you will see Ascendant will pick up as the league gets older. But there's a number of Ascendancies that just seem bad or outclassed by others. Assassin, Trickster, and Guardian in particular are doing poorly in all game modes at the moment. So whether it be softcore, whether it be hardcore, whether it be trade-enabled, whether it be solo self-found. And they also continue to do poorly when you restrict to only looking at the highest level players. So these builds are also doing poorly if you restrict to only looking to level 97 and up. You will see that they're still not doing very well there, despite those players having more resources. And really, the people who've got to level 97 already at this point in the league, they will have more resources than someone that reaches level 95 in week 6 of the league will have access to. That said, we will see if the Assassin moves up a bit when Awaken Cast on Crit is more available, because Awaken Cast on Critical Strike got massive buffs in 3.16, but it's still a very rare gem at the moment. When that becomes more widely available, you will start seeing people using it. And the reason it got buffed is because of that Critical Strikes Mastery that gives you +3 to the level of all Critical Strikes related, Critical Tag support gems, and Awaken Cast on Crit scales a lot with gem levels. So, next up is defensive style viability. It's a lot harder to separate these from each other now. So in the last league, I would generally look for a few specific markers on the passive tree. And that was a lot clearer. That was a lot clearer because you'd have things like acrobatics. And once someone took acrobatics, you knew, okay, this is a build that's scaling dodge as a primary defensive layer. They've taken acrobatics. They're also definitely going to take phase acrobatics. And you could predict quite a lot of the rest of their tree from that. But with all of the overhauls that took place to defenses in 3.16, it's really difficult because you can't tell what types of rares people are using from the data scraped on PoE.Ninja. You can't tell their evasion rating, you can't tell their armor rating, at least not from any quick summary. You can dig and find it, but you can't just find it straight away. So what I started looking for was some of the auras people are using that are defensively minded. And I noticed that 25% of characters use Grace and not Determination. 19% use Determination and not Grace. 18% use both, 38% neither. Now this is trade-enabled softcore. Obviously hardcore, you start seeing a slight change in this. We'll get to that in a sec. Discipline, on the other hand, is much less used at 13%. Interestingly, there is basically no difference in Grace Determination usage amongst people who are using Discipline. So people who are using Energy Shield are actually quite likely to pick up one of the other defensive auras. So either the armor aura or the evasion aura, because these do synergize quite well with Energy Shield now. Molten Shell is the most popular guard skill. Immortal Call and Steel Skin are behind, but not by a lot. And Ghost Dance is the most popular keystone on the entire tree, rewarding Energy Shield based characters for a minor investment into evasion, but also being something that a life-based character can use quite well as well, as long as they've got a modest investment in Energy Shield. Magebane, Zealot's Oath, and Divine Shield see meaningful use as other defensive keystones, and Chaos Inoculation is really out of favour, down to 5% of the meta this league, as are Glancing Blows and Mind Over Matter, both down to 4%. All of those, Chaos Inoculation, Glancing Blows, and Mind Over Matter, were more popular than that last league. Iron Reflexes is very unpopular, despite, in my opinion, being fairly good, and it's being used by 2% of players in the current league. Fundamentally, we see a shift away from the biggest effective life pools and a shift towards more focus on mitigation. I think this means that 3.16 Defenses Overhaul was quite successful. You're starting to see players actually care about armor, you're starting to see them care about evasion, and trying to build around those rather than just have as many life points as possible and then use either dodge or block as your primary defensive layers. Armor and evasion have become more popular, Energy Shield less so. Endurance charge nodes, interestingly, on the passive tree are quite unpopular. Enduring Composure Cluster Jewel is a little bit of an exception at 7%, but that is a very powerful node. That's the one that causes you to gain an endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently. But the +1 endurance charge passives are seeing very, very little use on the tree. A quick note on hardcore, Determination and the Molten Shell package are seeing much more use in hardcore than they are in softcore, and they are already popular in softcore. Hardcore players love their armor, and even more so in hardcore solo self-found, where a strict majority of players at high level are using Determination. One last important note on the defenses, a lot of this stuff is still being worked out. People are still optimizing things, and I think we will see over the next sort of couple of weeks, we might see some seismic shifts in this meta as players just discover better and better ways to build defenses. Next up, let's talk about skills, and Toxic Rain is not what I would term dominant, but it is the best skill at the moment, and it is putting up very high numbers. It's doing very, very well, mostly as a champion, but also quite popularly as a raider. The physical trapper archetype is coming in second. So we've got Toxic Rain is putting up about 3,000 people onto the leaderboard. Exsanguinate/Seismic Traps builds are putting up 2,472. Skeletons 1,300. Tornado Shot with Corrupting, usually with Corrupting Fever, is 1100. Poisonous Concoction's another 1100. Then there's Lightning Strike, General's Cry, Righteous Fire, Bane. Cyclone is an attack build. Caustic Arrow, Essence Drain, and Cyclone is a cast on critical strike build that round out the top 13 builds that we've got this league at the moment. This is very early days though. You also notice that the other section is the largest on the pie chart, and that is always a good thing to see. You want this other section to be as big as possible because that gives you a sense that there's a reasonably good level of build diversity. What this pie chart would look like if you had no build diversity this league, you would have one thing, let's say it might be Toxic Rain, that's taking up this much of the tree, and then you'd have you'd have something a bit less than that for your other section when you've taken out the top 13. So it's looking reasonable. It's perhaps Toxic Rain and the physical trapper archetypes were left a little bit too good, and that's why they're sort of pulling away. They're performing better than any of the top 3.15 builds performed in 3.15. So Toxic Rain is performing better than Spectres did at this point in 3.15, and Exsanguinate/Seismic is performing better than either Forbidden Rite Totems or Spectral Shield Throw did in 3.15, but it's not by a very large amount. And really all it would take is a couple of hundred people dropping off the physical trapper archetype or a few hundred dropping off Toxic Rain, and we'd start seeing some of the level of build diversity we had last league. Anyway, that's a bit of a roundup of what we've seen in the first week and a half of the league. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and I will see you around.